What we're going to do this morning is take you on another slide tour, and we'll look at some of those rules and actions. And we'll group buildings according to period and the rules of colors applied in terms of historic period. So that will be a lesson for us all. But what we want to look at now with the slides are some examples of things that were done right in some cases and not done so well in other cases. I have a number of before and after pictures of the houses, a few commercial buildings, but mainly houses, so that you can see where color can take you and lead you and what it can accomplish on behalf of your building. So why don't we hit the lights again, and we'll take another look at slides. This is the first building I wanted to show you, and I'm going to try to basically take the buildings through in terms of time period in the same phases that we talked about earlier. This was a brick building that had been painted through the years. A lot of soft brick here in Iowa was painted within 20 years of construction because it was soft brick and it was disintegrating. Sometimes brick was painted because changes were made in a wall and the owner was trying to cover up that change or alteration. In this case, it was painted because the owner lacked any sense of creativity, I suspect. And had a nice red brick building, and what did he want to do? Paint it gray, and this is what he got. A very nondescript building, all the detail disappears. So the new owner painted the building as you see here, and what they did is they did a couple of things right. They painted it brick red. They decided to highlight the trim in a cream color, but one of the things they did wrong, and I'm sorry that my slides aren't going to drop in of that particular detail. The window arches are segmental arches over the windows, and all they chose to do was to pick out the keystone in that arch in that cream color. So they've obscured the original brickwork in that building by not letting you see the full shape. Now, I probably, if I were them, would have painted the whole arch that cream color if that's what they were going to do. The new windows in the building are painted a dark green, as are the entrance doors. So that they did right. But the arch itself should have been painted the trim color so that you could see the original shape. One of the rules in a historic house is that you paint the sash a particular color, as we see here. And I'll go over some of those rules as we go along, because I think that they help you figure out what to do. I'll wait till the end to summarize those. Here's another example of a building that was going to get a paint scheme eventually, but started out by taking off the siding, going back, putting on the all new clapboarding to give it its original appearance back. The building ended up with a cream color, probably could have been a little darker tone. The building faces south. Here's an example of that telling us something. The building was going to be in full light. It could have taken a little more of a medium tone for the body color. But the trim and the ornamentation ended up working well. Sort of the reverse colors as you saw in that brick house or brick building previously. In this case, the cream color was the main body tone. Another commercial building had been painted green, all one color through the years. And what we wanted to do with this one when I was working with the owner is to, again, simulate that original brick color. So we went back and we started off by putting new windows and new storefronts in the building. And then we went back to the building itself and we said, let's make this building look brick again. And we put a dark red color of the brick on it. This is a north-facing building. The main problem it has is when it's brick colored, the trim was going to be a little bit dark for it. As you walk along the street today, the colors are just fine, but they are medium colored greens, khaki colors. We pulled the red into the trim color of the doors, and we set off the windows in a nice dark black color, and that made all the difference. Here's another building. It had been originally constructed with a stucco finish with sort of a sandstone look to it. The building had coins, that's the term for the trim on each of the corner joints, inscribed into it, and the front had been given mortar lines incised into it. So what we wanted to do was to emulate the original colors of this building as close as we could, and we came up with a series of cream tones. But there's really only 3 colors on this house. The body color, the trim color, and the sash color. And the most important thing was we also painted those, the wrought iron work on the porch roof railing that we reproduced. We painted that the same black color that it would have been originally. Now notice we didn't pick out any of the scroll cut detailing or the dental work in any other color. That's not the way it would have been done. It would have been all one color. The corner posts on this also have a beveled edge on them. A lot of times people paint that another color. It never was done. It was all one color. Unless you can prove it with a historic photo, paint it all one color. Here's a house, white with green shutters. The owner decided they wanted to keep the shutters, but they wanted a little more of an interesting paint scheme. We ended up with more of a medium tone. Again, whether the trim is lighter than the body doesn't really make so much difference. It's the color choice we needed to make for the main body depending on where it was located. In this case, it was on a hill, so we could use a slightly darker color, and there was a lot of dense foliage around it, so we could use not the darkest color, so we went for a medium tone. The window sash themselves are painted a nice dark brown to match the shutters. They decided to keep the shutters. They enjoyed them. It's not going to hurt anything, but the house did not originally have shutters. This particular house, the owners were a little bit more boisterous with. I doubt that the house would have ever been painted with quite such rich ornamentation, but at least they did it right. That is, they didn't overdo it. Not every little detail was picked out, but on the cornice line, they left the brackets the same color as the trim. That's the most common error that people make, is they pick out the bracket in its entirety in a different color. But in this case, you can see how the same color of trim ties everything together with that common cream color. Another building, what we were trying to do is take a building that had been known as the gray elephant in the neighborhood. It was all gray with white trim. And we went back and put on a medium terracotta color on the body, and then did the trim in a nice burgundy red and a sandstone color for what was the artificial coining that had been put on the building. The roof on the building was a nice deep red, brand new roof, so we tied that color into the trim work. The house isn't the prettiest house in the world. It never will be, but the colors on it made it stand out a little bit better on the in its very prominent location. Another gray elephant, gray and white for years and years. The owners came back in and they painted it brick color, and they did the right thing. The porch is all one trim color, nice cream color, as is all of the sash, or as is all the cornice line. The thing they did wrong here, though, and if you remember one of the rules, don't paint your downspouts in a color different than the wall color. They should have taken the cream color down beyond the cornice line, or just to the cornice line, and then painted the rest of that downspout red to match the wall. That's about the only thing I would do differently on this one. The window sash are painted a nice dark black and makes them stand out. This was a house in Davenport. If you're familiar with Vic Spiderbeck, jazz cornetist, this was his boyhood home. It had been painted Hawkeye gold through the years and stood out on the street, but it was asbestos covered. And when the owners were going to shoot the movie about Vic's life, I arranged for them to acquire the building, actually bought it. We did a restoration on portions of the building. They were shooting a movie, and they had distinct ideas about what colors it should be painted. And that was not necessarily historically accurate, but we got the house back in its original condition. So I'm happy with that, and am not too worried about the end result. In any case, they wanted it painted a nice cream color with white trim. It makes the trim at least stand out in a much better way than it used to. This is an all-new porch that we built back onto the house, and the end result is that's better. So this is the house as it looks today. The paint job is mainly to show you that you can go too far in the other direction. We went from Hawkeye Gold to Chicken Yellow, and I call it that because the owners were basically a little too, they didn't have courage to paint it the richer set of Queen Anne colors that it might have had. But the house is there, and it can be painted again in 7 to 10 years. Another example of a Queen Anne style went from the outside that white envelope to what you see here, much richer color. Here's a use of awnings that makes sense. Dark green awnings, very typical from that time period, and the green is in the window sash trim line, and that's the color they chose for the awnings, and it works very well. A late Queen Anne style was just beginning to be painted when I took this particular view. The owners did what I call a poor man's paint test, and that is they went out and with a piece of sandpaper sanded off paint to get various ideas of what the underlayers were originally. And they had, I helped them select the paint colors, and by the time they started to do their paint testing, they discovered that lo and behold, the paint colors were exactly the ones that I'd recommended that they use, and they were just delighted. So they ended up using a couple of cream colors because this is a late Queen Anne. The colors were beginning to move a little lighter away from the more boisterous, darker Queen Anne colors of the late 19th century. This was actually built about 1905. And the result was a dramatically different looking house when they got done, and a really handsome building. The sash, I had suggested that they use an olive green for the sash rather than a hunter green, and when they were doing the paint sampling, that's the color they found. So we were very fortunate to end up with not just a period paint scheme, but a historically accurate paint scheme on this particular house. Here's an example of what happens when you don't do the right thing. The body colors on this house on Kirkwood Boulevard in Davenport had been the same for years and years, and the new owners moved in. They wanted to put their name on it, and they went in and they decided to paint up all of the porch elements. So they started with those wonderful columns at the corner, and they painted the base this kind of, I was going to say flesh color, but that's not really the color. It was sort of a manila envelope color, and it was just garish. These were concrete blocks. That's the color they should be painted if they need to be painted anything, concrete block color. But instead they painted them this color, and then they added this kind of sage green that didn't have anything to do with the rest of the house anywhere, and put that on the deck. It didn't make any sense there, and it didn't make any sense on the porch elements. They should have left well enough alone and left that nice putty color with a cream trim, not picking out contrasting elements in any more measure than they needed to. Here's another thing you don't do. Don't paint a house all one color. Especially, don't make it match the roof color. This particular brick building originally probably had a monochromatic or a polychromatic effect that was accomplished by the red brick, probably a second color of brick for the arches, and a third color for the keystones. There's probably some stone trim in it, so you might have had 4 different colors of masonry materials that get all washed out when you paint it one color. And then there's the Halloween house, as it's come to be known. It's a little too much. It's oranges, it's yellows, and these dark greens are put together in a fashion that just makes no sense. And people think it gives historic paint colors a bad name, because when you've got one like this, everybody forgets all the good ones that have been done, and they just focus on the crazy one that is down the street. And then there's this house. Is this house in Mount Vernon? I thought I had stopped to take a slide of it one day when I was coming through. It's in my collection of not such well done houses, so I'll sort of let that speak for it. But the colors are just, they don't quite make sense. They're too inappropriate in terms of the time period. They should be very light, plain colors on this house. The Gambrel Cottage, the Colonial Revival, would have inspired creams, yellows, light tans, and light grays in variations. Probably a monochromatic scheme except for the window sash, but shades of one of those colors.
Yeah, you have the repaint job.
Okay, well then we'll look at that in a few minutes.
Yeah, that's nice, because I wished I had a before.
Well, you can have a copy of my slide.
Thank you.
Then there's the problem with the houses that I call the blue gene problem. There are some people that must have been born with a blue gene that inspires them to paint buildings blue. And blue is a fine color. My eyes are blue. Many of your eyes are blue. Kitchens are great blue. Bathrooms, bedrooms, living rooms. The frock on your 5-year-old should be blue. But not in general the exteriors of buildings. It's a color that does not wear well. It's a color in the real estate business that is difficult to sell. It lacks curb appeal. If you're a realtor and you have a house that's painted blue and the owner's thinking about repainting it before they sell it, they'll tell you not to paint it blue because it makes people turn away. Even if those people have the blue gene, they will not buy a house that's painted blue, by and large. So what I'm going to give you now are a few examples of blue houses and blue buildings to make my point. Most of these do not need comment. They are masonry, in this case it's masonry materials, nice solid masonry materials in a functional building that was built as a creamery actually. And all those colors are lost because the interior decorating business that went in here wanted the outside to match the inside. That's no reason to paint an exterior of a building blue. Here's a wonderful villa, Italianate villa, painted in shades of blue. It should have been painted in shades of gray if they want blue. I always counsel gray. This little blue cottage doesn't show off so well with all this light that we have in the room, but it is an example. In fact, could we turn the light off in the back? I think we might, if we could do that, I think we might be able to get a little bit better look to our slides here. Yeah, that's a little better. In any case, this little blue cottage looks even tinier in this spot than it did before it was painted blue. I would have probably preferred it stayed white. This particular building, not the best paint job in the world, but when they painted it blue, it looked nice for a while, but I'll tell you that blue started fading within a year, and it all suddenly looked unpainted. That's the effect of a fading blue building. It looks like it needs paint well before its time. Here's another house, too much blue. Look at the sky. Sky is blue. The house shouldn't be blue. It doesn't stand out. Here's another blue house. Again, an example of that quickly deteriorating blue paint. And this one, too much blue. And another one, again, too much blue. Unfortunately, I can find too many examples of blue houses, so the word hasn't gotten out yet. But people who know me know that I'm not fond of blue, so they never suggest that when they either hire me to paint colors or ask me what I think about their house. The next slides are examples of some other common errors. And here's the bracket error I was telling about before. It's inappropriate to paint brackets a contrasting color in their entirety, like you see here. It makes them stand out, and they look like they're not attached to anything. The goal in an Italianate-style house like this one, with those brackets, was to make that wood look like stone. It was simulated masonry. That's what they were trying to make it look like. And never would the simulated masonry be picked out in a color different than the material that it was attached to. So that's why all those brackets should have been painted cream color. Now, if there's a recessed section in the front of those brackets, sometimes I suggest people paint those a darker color of the same color of the trim, a darker shade of the same hue, in order to accentuate the shadow and give it some depth. But right now, you look at those brackets and you can't even tell if there's any ornament in them because they're all painted the wrong color and they're just hanging loosely out there along the edge. This particular building doesn't look too bad here in Mount Vernon. I picked out those paint colors some years ago with Dick Thomas and his fleet of paint students that summer. We ended up with a really good result, I think. And we worked very hard to get the right combination of colors to work together. Another building, again, the varying textures of on the building are accented by a change in color, so that the lower level gets one color, the next band up gets a second color. There was a shift in the shingle elements or trim elements, I forget which, that caused us to put another band in and then carry that into the gable. So the building had 3 distinct levels, and we accented them with gradually darkening and shade colors. So we went from a khaki color on the first floor to a terracotta color to a burgundy color by the time we got up to the very top, and using the same trim throughout to tie the building together. That's how you use a trim color. This is an example of a building in Davenport, and the owners hired me. They had some ideas. They weren't going to change the roof, so we had to start with what we had. But what I could tell for sure was that we were going to have to accent that triangle shape in the front to make sure that stood out in both the porch and on the main house. And that was one of the things we were going to have to deal with. This house hadn't been painted in over 20 years. And this is what we ended up doing with the paint colors. And that was the end result. The owners insisted on doing the modillions, the little brackets under the over the porch entrance area in a contrasting color. I would have kept those the cream color. But ultimately, it's their house. They got to put the paint on, and they did everything else pretty well. So I was pleased with the end result. Another building, this is an example of, again, the painting of those brackets in an incorrect way. This is on a building in Iowa City. Here they're paired brackets, and they just hang out there in a way that is just inappropriate. This is a better example, building built in the 1870s, Italian style. The owner did a really fine job on this one, I think. It's designed by a German-born architect, German-trained architect. This was his first commission in Iowa in 1871. And when we got the original historic photo, we could see there was some contrast in the colors on the building, originally in the brick. And so we wanted to accentuate those. And those are original shutters, by the way. So they were perfectly fine to keep intact. And the owner ended up putting 3 colors on. The window sash, actually I think the window sash are black. The shutters are a deep brown, cream trim, and then the plain khaki colored body. And it works. The modillions along the upper edge of the roof line are all painted the same color as the rest of that trim in order to look like the stone. That's what the architect was trying to accomplish with these wood members. He didn't have stone to work with, so make the wood look like stone. This is always one of my favorite slides to show because people enjoy seeing, again, what happens to a building that hasn't been painted for 20 years. This was all white, and the owners were getting a housing rehab loan from the city of Davenport, and for an extra $1,000 they could do a historic paint scheme. All they had to do was talk to me about the paint colors. So that's what we did, and this is the result. It was a dramatic statement. The owners were absolutely thrilled. They didn't believe me when I said this is what it was going to look like, and when we were done, they were absolutely delighted. This particular project had a steamrolling effect on the block. I got a call from the neighbors across the street, and they said, help us do our house. And so we took another white house that was just across the street and down a little bit, and we gave it a fairly straightforward, simple gold and cream colored with a dark, I think these are, I think we ended up with dark red as the accent color. Yeah, the porch deck and the front doors are dark red, and the wood windows inside the storm windows are a dark red as well. Then there's this house, the neighborhood paint job. It had been the black house through the years, called that, sort of another gray elephant, dark black, almost gray paint job with white trim. And everybody was so thrilled when a new owner came. The neighborhood chipped in to paint the house themselves. This is the crew of volunteers showing up over a 2-weekend time period. The owner did all the priming themselves, and so when we arrived, we got to do the fun work. All the prep had been done, and we simply put on body color, kind of a dark green khaki color, a bright red roof, cream color on the trim, and the window sash stand out here in a nice dark black. So it's really telling what you can do with a paint job if you try. And I conclude with this one because I think it's a pretty handsome color scheme. Building also in Iowa City. The cream is used effectively as a trim color to tie everything together. The owners wanted to have a little bit more color on the house, so we compromised, and I said, well, do the dark green window sash and then do the dark green along the edge of the cornice. And they did that. It accentuates the returning cornice, and I think it turned out pretty well. It's a compromise in the paint scheme, but in a paint scheme that probably would have liked to have seen all of that cornice trim done in a single color. But again, the owners ultimately paint the house, pay for the paint, so they get to choose. So that's a look at some examples. We can go ahead and turn the lights back on, and then we'll take a look at some slides here in Mount Vernon, and then I'll answer any questions you have about your own house. Now we're going to take a look at some buildings here in Mount Vernon. And for the next few minutes, I'm not going to take credit for having taken any of these slides. I don't think for more than maybe one or two I had anything to do with the color schemes. But what I think it is an example of what's happened in Mount Vernon in the last really almost 10 years. There's been a metamorphosis. All those moths turned into butterflies. And a good many of them are very creative South American iridescent butterflies. A few of them show the affection of their homeowners in ways that some of us don't quite understand. We couldn't imagine ourselves up on the ladder at the heights they were when they were attaching that third, fourth, or fifth detail paint color. But in all cases, they show great interest and care. I'm always glad to see a multicolor paint scheme on a building. I'm always pleased if it's a little closer to the period that it is from, because I think that will, in the long run, stay the building better than something that's a little too aggressive, robust in nature. So let's take a look at those slides, and I'm pleased if any of these are your buildings. I apologize if I say anything that doesn't fit well with you in advance, but please know that I really do admire all of the intestinal fortitude it took to do these jobs, as well as the handwriting for the checks that went out to paint companies and painting contractors. So let's take a look at them. This is a wonderful example of a colonial revival bungalow. It has a little bit of the detailing that was left over from one style, but it's being brought into the modern age in the bungalow or bungaloid form. They got rid of the Palladian window you can see up in this gable end. Instead of a round arched window in the center, there's a square-topped window, flanked by square-topped windows. But they couldn't quite get rid of all of the circles in this rectilinear design, the semicircular fanlight in the gable dormer. This house is done in really 3 colors, maybe even 2. But the green, sage green body with the cream trim, and the window sash, I'm not sure if they actually ended up painting them or if they were white vinyl sash that didn't get painted at all. By and large, I think this job was done fairly successfully. It harkens to the pastels that were coming into vogue in this time period for classical revival buildings, and it's being applied to a vaguely craftsman style form, the bungaloid form. So I think it really works pretty well. This one, the owners were probably trying to make the building look a little bit more like a Victorian period structure. It's a modest gabled L. Probably the trim looks to me to be sort of a terracotta colored with the red color on the main house, and it seems to work pretty well. I'm not sure about the exact tones, but they certainly did the right thing with the window sash being the nice black here that we see, and overall I think the color combinations worked out pretty well. This one I'm not exactly sure if is it a pale gray for the body color, Dick? I think it probably looks to me like it works well. They picked out that triangle in the gable on the side just very well. The rest of the body is one color, then they used the trim to surround it, and then picked out a third medium gray color that went with the roof tones. It works really quite well. What they could have done better would have simply been to have painted the window sash a nice dark black to tie all that gray together. Black is just a wonderful color for window sash. And again, they painted the trim. In this case, the balustrade is new, and so they painted it out, tried to make it disappear by painting it the trim color, and that was the thing to do. I studied this slide for quite a while, trying to decide for sure what had happened here in terms of the application of that color up in the triangle end, and I decided it worked. What they did is they took a color that should have been used for the window sash, which it doesn't appear that happened, but that would have tied the whole building together. That nice dark green up in the gable end works, but they needed more of it. And what they did was not quite right. They painted the window caps, you'll see above on the first floor there, they painted those the dark green, thinking that was the way to get the green into the rest of the building. And what they really needed to do was to take the green and put it around the window sash. The cap should be the same color as the framing, so that all should have been cream colored. And then the window sash themselves should have been the dark green. And that would have tied it together and made all that, made that color work. But I think in terms of how it works up in the gable end, it looks just fine. Here's a simple paint combination, and it works by and large, except for a couple of things. Once you start painting trim one color, you really better paint it all the same color. And they decided to paint the trim medium brown on this house. And what they didn't paint medium brown, they should have. See this board, or the member that, there we go, right across here. This section here, this beam, porch beam, all of that should have been the same brown color. And you say to yourself, which is probably what they said, which was, we don't want that much brown. Well, then they should have rethought the issue of that color as the trim color, and they might have come up with a slightly lighter shade of that. I might have gone with, they've got sort of a pinkish beige on the building, and I might have gone more with a gray color to be something that I could have lived with a little bit better. But they did fine with the skirting, with the recessed panels matching the body color of the house. The question of how to paint a balustrade is always an interesting one. I generally say paint the balustrade the same color as you paint the rest of the trim. If you decide to paint it a contrasting color, be prepared for the fact that it's not going to stand out against the body of the house, and that's exactly what's happened here. But they did everything right with the window sash. Look how that nice sharp black edge stands out, and here they took a black storm door and made that stand out. I can't tell, but it may be that there's a natural finish on the door behind, and that's a way to deal with that. If you have a natural finish door, historically, keep it that way, and put a clear glass storm door in front of it to give it some protection. Here's some shades of blue. The bottom color I'm not put off by as a shade of blue-gray. It's when you get to the upper level where it's a stronger blue that it doesn't quite work as well for me. The concept in terms of shading is fine. Building on this very large house, it can take these rich dark colors and going from a lighter color on the bottom level to a darker color on the top was always the way it was done. Believe me, believe me, I've seen enough historic buildings documented to know that this was the case. Probably in this case, instead of going towards blue, I would have gone towards more of a green color, a greenish gray, and maybe a darker greenish gray. It may be that we're looking at a band board that's painted another color through here. And if that's a dark green, then what I would have done, and this is a lower bluish gray, I would have probably played off 3 different shades of green instead of the 2 different colors of blue. Black is a pretty hard roof color to work with, and it almost demands that the sash be painted black if you've got a black roof. So in the case of this house, that's the other thing I would have done, is to pick those window sash out, I would have tried to do them in black. Here's an example of a house that was painted not too bad in terms of combination of colors. Gray with cream is a perfectly acceptable color scheme for a house of this time period. But when the owners got to that 3rd level, they blew it. And there's no other thing to say. The trim is painted absolutely correctly, going all the way up on the first level trim is fine, 2nd level trim is fine. Whoops, we get to the 3rd level, and all the trim is painted the body color. Now, they maybe ran out of energy, I'm not sure, but if they were to go back and take the cream color and now pick out all the little box work that's along this edge and the trim board that goes up the center here, then they'd really have a nicely done job. Use that paint to accent the trim elements as they were intended. This is an example of how you use blue in a trim color to make the same mistakes you do when you use blue in a body color. It just doesn't work. It's too dark. It's too much contrast. This is an example of this pinkish color facade with the blue trim. It just doesn't work. And then you bring in a 3rd color. In this case, the gable end. It doesn't tie in with the rest of it. Probably what we're seeing is a building that should have started out with a different body color, and a whole different series of decisions would have been made based on that. I probably wouldn't have ended up with picking out as much of the trim in the porch, but their goal to pick out all that detail failed because they used the dark blue. It just doesn't stand out. You can't see the detailing. And I don't know if this is it isn't north facing, south facing, and even then the dark blue just washes away all of the ornamentation. So what they wanted to do was to embellish the ornamentation, and what they ended up doing was doing just the opposite. The blue, as I've said before, it's just not a color that was ever used in historic paint seasons, except very rarely, and then generally only for, believe it or not, in some houses early in the 19th century it was used for window sash. Yes?
And on the flip back here, okay, that is, it looks like they have aluminum windows, or, windows.
Yeah, and what do you do with aluminum windows?
Should you just leave them aluminum? I mean,
it's a very good question. Probably, as storm windows, they're probably not doing you much good. Number one, realize that. Aluminum sash, excuse me, aluminum sash convey so much cold and they're so loosely fit to those windows, they're not doing you much good. But as screens, you need a window, something. I have seen aluminums painted. They don't hold the paint as well as wood sash do. If you have a new plain aluminum, you need to texture or go over the texture of it with something like a vinegar or some kind of an acid treatment, and then paint it. I have metal windows on my house, and we went back and they were white painted metal windows that just stood out in an inappropriate way. And we went back and I ended up putting 4 coats of paint on them. I'm not real thrilled with the result, and I'm going to have to paint them sooner than I would like, but that's truly the only solution to get those windows to really act the way they should. If you're buying new window sash as storms, I counsel people to buy a dark a dark sash finish. Either, and generally, the dark metal window sash are better. The very best is a good wood storm or screen. I know that's not going to happen for most people. There's some good companies out now that are giving you self-storing wooden screen storms, so consider that as another possibility. It just is hard to work with. I have on a couple of occasions painted houses with color combinations that would use the aluminum color to sort of draw attention to that sash. And we have come into a house like this one, and we would have painted it in tones of gray and gray and cream, so that the gray at least stands out. Even though it's not a dark color, it stands out as a different color visually when you look at it. So that's how you play with the colors to accomplish the goal. Here's, and I suspect that's what's happened here with this house. A couple of shades of gray, and those window sash are probably aluminum. And you can see how it works. They put a nice dark gray on the trim, and that makes the sash color stand out a little bit. These people looked at their roof color and said, it's in dark grays, and it looks like I'm going to be living with that in the future. It's a hard one to say what to do when you've got, when you're doing that. You need to make sure that your trim color along your cornice edge is sufficiently different from your roof color that it doesn't bleed together as one color. Here's another one in grays. I suspect that roof has a little bit of a pinkish cast to it. Gray is about the best color to put with pink, believe it or not. Gray, or, and surprisingly, creams. Creams and maroon are good combinations with the pinkish cast roof. But in this case, they used grays, and I think it worked pretty well. Their window sash are probably, I think they're maybe new vinyl, would be my guess here. They are white. They stand out. Again, if you can't get your nice dark color on your window sash, the alternative is to go the other way, and that's what they've done with white in this case. The only thing they did here that I probably wouldn't have done, and that is up here at the joint between the soffit and the trim board here, the cornice board coming across, they painted the molding in there a dark color. I generally find that that is not successful. It draws attention to a design element that was just put there to cover up a joint. It wasn't a decorative element in the way we think of decoration on a building. It was simply put there to cover the joint, the gap between boards that were meeting. So by and large, it's better to paint that all one color than draw attention to the horizontal line. Now, what would I have done with this chimney, metal chimney that was attached here? I probably would have done exactly what they did, and that is leave it unpainted. I know from heating with wood myself that there's not much paint that will stick to that because of the heat that's in there, and you're better off letting that be the natural material that God intended, in this case, a stainless steel finish. The only other thing that's probably not done correctly here is the white columns on the front porch. They should have been done the same trim color, the dark gray. If dark gray was going to be your trim color, you've got to live with it for your columns as well. This is a complex building, and I suspect they started out with a roof that was already in place. And the problem here is that the color that was chosen for that second story body, I'm not sure, I think it's a different color than the first story, is too close to the roof color. It plays on the roof color fine, but it's just too much of that same color. So I would not have chosen that color for my second story color. The first story color, the cream gold color for the body, and then they set off the trim in what appears to be two colors. That trim should have probably just been one color, and then the sash, I guess they've got the sash in one color and the trim in another. I probably would have switched those around and put the dark green on the window sash and the cream for the trim. I would have carried that cream all the way up along the roof line. That would have been a nice contrast between the roof and whatever color they put on the body for the second floor. I probably would have gone to more of a terracotta color. Yellow with terracotta is a very handsome mix. A terracotta, think of as being the color of a unfinished, unglazed clay pot. And that would have been a real handsome color combination. So in this case, the green has been misplaced. It should have been on the window sash, and the trim should have been all that cream color. So they should have just reversed it. Then the porch trim would have all been that nice cream color and wouldn't have been so dark. It would have set off those porch elements. And that color combination would have been fitting with this period, which is probably 1905, 1910. And the foundation should have been gray. A putty-colored gray foundation would have been the color of the ashlar cinder block. This is a case where there's too much contrast between the body and the trim is the same color as the roof. It's pretty much a charcoal black, and that it doesn't give you the benefit of a polychromatic effect. If you're going to put a paint color on, you want it to be distinct and different from anything else that appears on the house. And in this case, part of the color scheme of the house is the roof. So you need to think about that trim color being different than the roof edge. And what they did, it looks to me like they painted the gutters and downspouts all a cream color because they got there and they realized they didn't want to paint them the trim color. But that's really the color they should have been painted. But to have painted them black wouldn't have made any sense. So the idea was good to want to draw attention to those detail elements. I just would have done it with a slightly different color combination. In this case, with a black roof and if you were going with a cream body, I would probably want to think about that a little bit. And I might have gone with a monochromatic color scheme in different shades of the same color, and the body might have been a little darker and the cream a little lighter. Interesting pair of houses, again, with window sash, contrasting. I probably would have tried to pick out, in this case, another color for the shingles in the gable end to set them off, but the balance of the paint job looks pretty good. And this one looks like it's weathering pretty well. We saw that in another slide earlier. And I think this one's not too bad. The only thing I would do differently here again is I would take that black or dark brown that's up in the gable peaks, and I would use that for my sash color, not for the caps on the windows, not the window caps, but for the sash color. And that would pull that brown down into the lower part of the house in a way that would make it realistic. It looks to me like they've done a nice dark colored front door, and that's perfectly fine. And it looks like they painted the foundation a stone color, and that's, if they painted it, that's what it should be. This is an interesting house, and I think the paint scheme worked out quite well. It's a monochromatic color scheme, and by that I mean it's the same hue but in different shades. And so it's like taking a can of gray paint and either throwing in white or throwing in black to get a different gradation. And in this case, a nice moderate tone of gray for the body, but they went with a lighter tone for the trim. And all those wonderful brackets are all the same color as the soffit and fascia that they're attached to. The dormers are properly detailed with the framing, and the window sash are set off in either a charcoal or a dark green in the way they should be. It works. Am I looking at shades of blue or shades of gray? Or both? Blue. Well, you've heard my comments about blue, so I won't make those again. In general, the application of colors seems to be pretty well done, except for the porch railing. The trim color should be applied everywhere. And if you're going to bring trim for your storyboards, as you see here. Storyboard, trim, corner board, water table. This needs to be the same color. Do not paint that brown. There's no reason in the world that should be painted that color. Well, you say you've got this up here. Bring that color somewhere else in the scheme. And in this case, I would have painted my window sash that color. Down here, you can just see it's like taking an eyeliner brush and outlining the edge of the eye. It draws attention. And then I would have probably, if you really, really wanted to have that red, put it on your front door. Make sure that your door stands out. The window sash around the window here. But don't bring that red into the porch elements. There's no reason to. It just doesn't fit. I think they did the right job here with bringing the red around on the side and the red band up here with the red roof. As blues go, this is about as good as you can do. And I suspect that there are two different shades of blue here, and if they're not, if they're the same blue, that's all right. Not the same blue, but the same color being on first and second floor, as long as they're divided by a separating difference here. The foundation, they did the right thing. The foundation is concrete or poured cement, and that's what they left it look like. And that makes sense. This one, I think, probably, if you want a red house, this is the thing to do. Probably a little bit more towards maroon would have been a better basic color, but overall, it's just a matter of getting enough of that green in the rest of the house to make sense. And again, what I would do is I would have taken that dark green and put it into the window sashes and onto the front door. And that would bring that green into focus. And I would have taken the body color and put that for the panels in the porch skirting. But otherwise, they've done the trim just as it should be done. And it looks to me that like they are living with one of those pinkish gray roofs, and that's a real challenge. I might have gone with a slightly more muted shade of green in the gable ends, but that's neither here nor there. This little cottage is trying to take advantage of its wonderful changes in shingle style in the gable end, and I don't have any problem with that. I'm not sure that these colors precisely make the point they want them to make, but the cream or yellow colored body with the cream trim, that's fine. I probably would have stayed with warmer colors. Yellow and blues just don't fit well together. Probably would have gone with maroons and terracottas if they wanted to set off the gable colors. And then bring one of those colors back into the window sash trim as a way to draw the color to the rest of the house. And this is, I think, the last slide in the group. I think this is really quite well done. I probably wouldn't have picked out these horizontal decorative lines on the porch. The building was trying to look like it was constructed of stone, the trim. And so they would not draw attention to the detailing. They would have simply had all of that be one color. And the house would have looked just as rich. It probably would have looked richer in the overall presentation if that trim had been left in all in one color. But the balance of the house, the colors, the dark gray for the body fits well with the roof, and that dark gray was an appropriately used color for Dutch colonial revival houses. Well, I guess we have another one. This one, if you want to do detailing with your paint scheme, they've done it right. That is, they've pulled enough of the detailing into enough different places without having too many different colors. They have, if you look carefully here, there are only 3 colors, but those colors have been applied in a way that draws your attention to the detailing, so that you have strong horizontal sections of trim all dealt with in the same way. You have the green integrated from the foundation all the way to the top of the house. And if you want to do a detail paint job, this is one of the better I've seen. So I really commend them for the paint job here. This one is, the problem is the orange. It's real easy in selecting a terracotta color to end up getting orange instead of terracotta. And I suspect that that's what they were trying to do with this particular house. Another one, in this case, we need that dark green in the sash. It's on the door, it's in the triangle locations, that's just fine, but boy, those windows need it. And that would bring out the house just the way it needs to be trimmed. I would also tell you in this particular case, if that were my house, I might hire a carpenter to come back in and put the water table board on that it probably deserved to have from the beginning. This bottom member here really looks like it should be painted the trim color. And it's not a true storyboard in this case, or water table. So I might have had a carpenter come back in and install that to make the house appear that it's not floating. This one, I would advise the owners to take the shutters off. The house has enough trim without shutters. And by and large, then the issue is how you attach light and dark trim colors. In general, I have difficulty placing colors that are as contrasting as these on a house. They've done about as good a job as you can with them, but I probably would have done another color in the scheme, and I probably would have painted the first story a different color than the second story, and then used the first story color in the third story gable ends. And then I would have integrated those colors into various parts of the porch trim so that they would make sense. And I would have a dark window sash instead of a light window sash. Here's a pretty good paint scheme. The dark gray with the cream. Again, the only problem, that horizontal, picking out that horizontal joint along the front doesn't quite work. But using the body color for the porch skirting does work. And that was our last slide. So we can turn the lights back on and give me all the questions you might have. And if any of you happen to have brought a photo of your house, I'd be glad to take a look at it and give you any specific advice. So, any questions? Yes?
White vinyl windows.
You don't come with easy questions, do you? What period?
It was built in 1896.
Okay, and roughly what style? Can you describe the house to me?
Maybe the Victorianish, I think so. It's got 3 different textures.
Okay.
3 different. So you would do lighter, darker, and then the top is same as the bottom.
Very likely. I might look with white vinyl. I have found about the best thing you can do is work with shades of gray. And with a black roof, that'll work. Shades of gray so that the gray is different enough on your trim so that that white vinyl really pops out. And then you'll use that trim color on your porch and in between the floors. And what you might end up with is 3 colors of gray in your trim and body, and in order to get the contrast between the different levels.